You are listening to the BU Podcast with Michael Arrington. We discuss social justice, childhood trauma, current events, hip-hop, and so much more. Now, here's your host, Michael Arrington.
Yo, what's good, man? Welcome back to the BU Podcast as we embark on another journey towards more inclusive and equitable educational landscape. I'm your host, Michael Arrington. Today, we're going to delve into another topic of paramount importance, raising the awareness and advocating for culturally responsive educational practices and DEIA work, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. In a world that thrives on diversity, it's imperative that our educational institutions mirror the rich tapestry of the cultures, backgrounds, and perspectives. Today, we're going to dive deep into the heart of this matter, exploring the strategies, challenges, and remarkable success stories that define the transformative movement. Throughout this episode, we'll be joined by my homegirl, my sister, Juanita Watkins, who is the diversity and equity officer for her school district, and she's in the forefront of this crusade for a more inclusive educational system. Together, we're going to try to uncover some of the pivotal roles that she has and some of the things that I do. Hopefully, we start shaping the minds and hearts of our future generations. But before we embark on that, let's take a moment to reflect on the profound impact culturally sensitive educational practice can have on a student's life. It's more than about just textbooks and classrooms. It's about fostering an environment where every student feels seen, heard, and valued. So whether you're an educator, a parent, policymaker, or simply someone passionate about transforming our educational landscape, this episode is for you. So get ready to be inspired, challenged, and empowered to take in your own spheres of influence. Stay tuned as we unravel this tapestry of culturally responsive education and DEIA work and learn how together we can create a future where every student can thrive. It's your host with the most, Mike Arrington. Let's jump in.
You are listening to the BU Podcast with Michael Arrington.
That's right, y'all. We back, the BU Podcast. I got my special guest, my sister from another mister, my doctoral partner in crime, Juanita Watkins. She is I'll let her tell you guys who she is. I'll let her go into it.
I am currently the coordinator of diversity and equity for Redlands Unified School District, as well as I have my own business, Be the Light LLC, which is consulting, coaching, and counseling for DEIB.
Yeah, so we'll get into that. So our topic today is advocating for culturally responsive education practices and, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And I know that's kind of your wheelhouse, which is why I wanted to bring you on to have these really courageous conversations about what needs to change in our education system. So let me start off with this. So what does culturally responsive education mean, and why is it crucial in today's diverse society?
Well, you're starting off with these big questions. So what does culturally responsive education mean? And what does it mean in this present day? Is that correct?
Right. Correct.
Oh, being culturally responsive, one is learning and knowing the culture. So when we think about culture, the first thing we think about is race, right? A lot of topics tend to go straight to race. And although race is a dominant factor, although race is a very important factor, there's so many other factors when it comes to culture, right? And what the schools have and, how they run their practices and policies. So there's a different type of culture there as well. But just being able to understand who's in the building, whether it be by ability or disability, whether it be by language or linguistics, whether it be by race, of course, whether it be by even politics, right, is a big thing. As we know right now, politics is polluting education across the board, higher ed and K through 12. But, being culture responsive is knowing who is in the building and how to respond to individuals when things happen, right? So, for example, if we have a student who celebrates Ramadan, right, and we're asking them to participate in PE activities that may be extremely hot outside, and we're saying we're going to mark them down. Well, we're not being culturally responsive because that student may need time. As we know, with Ramadan, students do not eat, right, for certain periods of the day. So that may make them maybe sometimes lethargic, and maybe sometimes they don't have as much fuel, right, to be able to run those laps and those different types of things. When we know that and we understand that about our students, then we're able to respond to them in a way that's healthy, right? Maybe saying, hey, let me give you an option. You can either participate in this or you can do something less strenuous because I'm aware that you are celebrating this particular holiday or time in your life. So being culture responsive gives our students the ability to feel like they belong, right? When they belong, then they're able to do more things and we're able to get more out of them. When I mean potential and capacity, right? When they feel like they belong. It's very important to education because our schoolhouses are a very diverse melting pot of all sorts of people, right? We have very diverse names, very diverse backgrounds, very diverse practices, right? From outside the schoolhouse that come inside the schoolhouse. And I think we highlighted that and know that even more through the pandemic, right? When we talked about that learning loss piece. Well, did our students really lose a lot of learning in that time? Because at that time, they spent more time at home learning more about themselves and their culture, right? That's a whole nother topic. But it's very important to education because we can't just do education one way, right? We can't do it the way that it's always been done, which is very oppressive and suppressive to students. So being culture responsive is knowing who's in the room.
Yeah, I think it's really the specificity of the need of the child. So, like you mentioned in your example about a student that observes Ramadan, it also could be a student that may be food insecure. Mm-hmm. And the reason why they act a certain way, or a student that comes from a group home that's sleepy first period because they had a whole lot of activity the night before, mm-hmm. And so it's being aware of one, knowing what that is and having a rapport with the student to be able to understand that's where he's coming from and then how you respond to it. I think that's the part of the piece that I think really gets missed in K through 12 specifically and higher ed, directly. So let me ask you this. How can educators and institutions effectively incorporate culturally responsive practices into their teaching methods and curriculum?
Well, one, you have to be very intentional with cultural responsive pedagogy, very intentional with culturally responsive, what am I trying to say? Perspectives, right? You have to be very intentional in meeting people, right? And talking to the people and asking them questions. Whenever I get questions about cultural proficiency and how do I get there, I always tell people to be intentional with people who don't look like you, who don't have the same beliefs, right? And how do you do that? Just by asking a question. Like, what does your name mean, right? Where'd you get your name from? Those are some of the basics. What are some of the things that you do in your culture that maybe are not done in my culture? If there's certain language or certain, like we used to call it, they used to call it back in the day to talk about Black vernacular. They used to call it ebonics, right? Asking questions about what does that particular phrase mean, right? We used to say all sorts of things, and continue to have really cool phrases in Black vernacular today, but just asking people, right, about who they are, right? How do they see the world? And being open to what their response may be to you. But in that, you can't just ask these questions and then let them fly over your head. You have to really take time to absorb these things, right? There's so many things. There's so many videos and books and all those different types of things on YouTube where you can learn about different cultures as well. But inviting people into the space and allowing them to be them, right? That's how you get there. That's how you progress. I don't think that anybody is culturally proficient. I think we all are becoming culturally proficient, are emerging culturally proficient, because it takes a lot. There's so many different cultures and nationalities, right, and different languages across the globe, that it would take more than a lifetime in order to be proficient in every single one. So daily intention, right? And with our students and even with our colleagues and our peers, most of the time, we will be very open to expressing who we are if you give us the opportunity to do so in a safe, brave space. And even then, when you mess up or when you don't do something right, just being human enough to say, you know what, I messed that one up. but I'm going to do better next time. Can you help me in this area? I think humility comes with understanding that none of us are perfect, right? And vulnerability. I like Brene Brown because she's a vulnerability coach, and she talks about vulnerability and courage and what it takes in order to be in these safe, brave spaces, right? That of who we are, and just talking about those things with each other, one-on-one, sometimes in groups. It's going to take courage. It's going to take courage.
For sure. I agree wholeheartedly with the whole vulnerability. You've heard me say in class, vulnerability is a superpower to us. You know what I mean? And so being able to have those spaces to be brave enough to be vulnerable, man, is very, very important, especially with students. But in your line of work, or what you've seen since you've been in the education system, what are some success stories or examples of schools or districts that have excelled in implementing DEIA work in education?
Everybody has their own way of doing, right? A success to one district may not be a success to another district. Specifically speaking about the district that I'm in, they had never had a DEI officer, right? I'm the first person to hold this position in this district. And so it was new to them and very new to me. I grew into this work, right? I did not know that it was diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility, right? I just kind of was doing it all these years. But when you think about just some of the small qualitative things, when we have students who are able to have access to things that they wouldn't typically have access to, that's important, right? And one big one, right now is having gender neutral bathrooms. That's a big thing across many districts, and there's people who are fighting against it, right? Because they want our students to conform to one way, either male or female, right? Not they and them, right? And that's self-expression. Right. And so having gender neutral bathrooms in our district, we have gender neutral bathrooms, right? Where students, despite how they identify, can feel comfortable going into in these bathrooms. Now, do we have multiples on the campus? No, but is it a start? Yes. Basic understanding of certain terms, right? Equity, what is that, right? There's so many definitions swirling about equity, right? That's a success when you can step on a school campus after you have had conversations or you had a professional development and people can say, oh, I know what equity means now. It means, right, giving our students what they need when they need it, delivered in the manner in which they need it with urgency, right? That's my definition that I tend to give out to people, right? And just giving them a simple version on trying to understand it. When we can get our common language down, that's a success, right? When we can say, you know what, we now have an African American Parent Advisory Council that we've never had before in a school district in a town that has felt a lot of historical tensions and somebody said institutional wounds yesterday during one of my AXA Academy classes. Somebody talked about that, right? Who has been predominantly held down by heterosexual male white beliefs, and now have this in a school district. That's a success. When I first entered into this role, one of my goals was to create this African American Parent Advisory Council committee. And as soon as it went out on our parent information system, right, that we put our flyers and things out, there was a lot of community members and parents who grabbed that flyer and put it in these various groups. And they had a lot of nasty things to say about me and calling it reverse racism and all of these different things, right. And I experienced a lot of backlash behind that. However, I just kept moving forward. But one of the particular person who started that post showed up at one of the meetings. And although he said, he stayed for the whole thing. He didn't say anything. Although he said, although he may not agree, he gets it, right? That's a success. That's a success for education, right? Because now he's no longer pushing against me. He's not making all that noise publicly. He may not understand it, right? But he said he gets it, right? He gets it. He understands why we're doing it, right? That's a success in education.
I think so. Like, I do implicit bias trainings, and one of the goals or the objectives of the training is to get people to just understand that they are biased, right? And we're all biased to a certain extent, but it's getting them to know that, okay, this is a blind spot for me. I need to do something about this. And then giving them examples of what it looks like in the real world, in their case, in the classroom, and kind of just seeing like, oh, okay, I get it now. I get why people consider me a racist, because I do tend to lean heavy on this certain demographic for whatever behaviors that they exhibit. And I think, like you said, I think the acknowledgement is the first part, right? And that's a success. And then once you get the acknowledgement, then you can actually go through it and hopefully start changing the culture and then changing the environment. I think that's important.
And I'm gonna even say the success part is getting them in the room before
right.
I
That's gonna be a
say
success.
anything, before you even say anything. If I can get you here, that's one step closer to success.
Exactly.
And if we end up staying through the whole training, then now we're working with something. Because I've had people walk out of my trainings, right? Because they just, for whatever reason, right?
Yeah, I've had people walk out. I've had people upset, cry. I had people come to me later like, man, I didn't realize that I was this bad, and those are all, to me, successes.
Yeah.
Right? Success is really just like equity. It's for that specific reason why it's successful. Right? What did it work in this? It may not work in every district, but it worked in mine, or it worked in my training. So I think that goes heavy. Is a term I heard recently, it kind of got reinvigorated recently. It's an older term, but it's a term called soft bigotry.
Mm.
And so I know it originated back, I think, when George W. Bush was president, and it refers to like the subtle, often unintentional forms of prejudice or discrimination, or low expectations directed towards a particular group of people, right? Which, stems from some of the implicit bias. But when I heard it and how I heard it I thought was important, because it was in a educational sphere, but it was regarding political views in regards to people who kind of lean more towards the right. And so, but he was using it as a weapon against those who are quote unquote woke, right? Like they're using this soft bigotry, like almost like a dog whistle term to like invoke some kind of something. But when you hear that term, and now that I gave you some context, what do you think about that?
I mean, I feel like that happens like every day, right? I feel like we experience it every day. Those are indirect microaggressions, right? Those are, oh yeah, I really want to do this for Latino kids, but we're going to lower the standard to make sure they meet the standard. That's soft bigotry right there, right? You're creating these lower expectations. You're not even allowing the kids to meet the bar by pumping them with resources and everything that they need. Instead, to make sure that our data, right, because everybody loves data, to make sure our data looks good and clean, we're just going to lower the standard, right? That happens every day, especially to many marginalized people, right? It's almost like similar to this whole affirmative action situation, right? Where people feel like they're lowering the standard if we consider race, right? For students of color to get in, right? And as we've learned, many white women are using affirmative action because women weren't allowed in certain spaces, right? To get in. So, God forbid they picked a person of color over somebody who is not, then they will use those things to leverage. For sure. And I think like it's a lot of weaponization of different things that were supposed to be for people of color or oppressed people. Now people have found like they found a cheat code to making it work for them. Right. And so hence the banning of all these books and curriculum. So which is a good segue to my next question. What is your feeling and thoughts on some of the political views and some of the political actions of those who are banning certain books? Yeah, so I believe that people are experts in what they do. So our teacher librarians in every single district have went through the proper and necessary schooling that they need to vet books. Okay. And so I cannot see, and I have not seen one teacher librarian yet put books in children should not read. And so the books that they're pulling off the shelves, right, have been vetted through. They have, just like, with administrators, we have a set of standards that we have to go through, right? And then, of course, with CDC, right, we have California Department of Education, CDE. I'm sorry, there's standards that has to be, go through and vet it through them. I feel like when we're pulling books off the shelves from and forbidding students to read them, we're not giving them the opportunity to learn the truths in those pages, right? We're not giving the authors the opportunity to express themselves. One big area of with every school district and every school is having literature that is diverse for all students to be able to see themselves, right? Windows and mirrors, right? Have opportunities to see experience outside of themselves, and then mirrors to see a reflection of themselves. We're banning these books based upon what? Fear, right? That's just like with critical race theory. When people want to say, oh, let's not bring up critical race theory, let's not highlight race, and how oppressive it is in different systems, right? Because there's fear, right? And that is it called white flight? And of people finding out, right? But here's the thing. Whether our kids find out in K through 12, they find out in college, they find out on the street, they're gonna find out. Right. So we might as well allow them to read these books, right, that have been properly vetted through, again, our professional district librarians. And we have the opportunity to have these discussions, constructive discussions in the classroom where we can teach, right? Because when we leave our kids, as we know, to their own devices, then their minds roam and they get to do whatever they want to do, right? So these banned books, I got them on my shelf.
Right.
And I have children of my own, should they decide they want to pick it up and read it, then come on and read it. But I feel like we should not be limiting students' rights to learn, right? We can't keep teaching from a place of deficit, right? We have to teach from the place of reality of what's going on. How many books are on the shelves and how many opportunities in our textbooks do our kids need to get to learn more than just the slavery side of African American, or they get to learn more than just Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, right? And Harriet Tubman, right? There's so many people, right? And so many things that are happening and have happened in our history that have been compartmentalized and smothered, right? When we're taking these books off the shelves, we're telling our kids that, hey, only pay attention to these people. Yesterday we were talking about it amongst educational professionals that Martin Luther King used to be the most hated man in America. Right. And how we celebrate him. How interesting is that? What about
cherry pick his quotes to fit their narratives?
Yeah, now everybody, we're celebrating and we have a holiday, we have all these different things. Well, what about the people in the banned books that you're taking out that have real life stories, And I can understand, a lot of parents, when I listen to the board meetings, they're upset because of maybe some of the graphic content that's in the books, right? And I get that wholeheartedly. I understand that. And I understand that when our kids are young, we want to be able to see and hear what they're reading, right? Because kids are very impressionable, right? But it's up to us to work with the school and the parents, to work with the librarians to say, hey, what if I allow my child to read this book that is very graphic, what supports do you have in place? And then that's when we bring in our marriage and family therapists. We have our counselors, right? We have our teachers. And even then we have to build capacity in our teachers. But I just don't feel like we should be pulling books off of shelves that have been properly vetted by our professional teacher librarians.
But I think the other side of this was I was having a conversation with one of my elder sisters the other day. She is in her 80s, and she was like, asked her this specific question about books being pulled off of shelves and banning curriculum. And she was like, she said, in every situation in this country, when it comes to Black people or come to people of color, you have to find the opportunity in the tragedy. And so she was like, this is an opportunity for young parents like yourself to start introducing these books to your children anyway, something that we kind of fell off on just because we got busy schedules and we're trying to climb the corporate ladder. We don't have that kind of time to sit back and read like we once did when the children were, of a certain age. It's like, this is the opportunity where you start to fill in that blank for them because they got access to all this information. They're a mouse click away from getting anything they want. So, but there's no context to it. So you can fill in the context. So you can tell them more than just about what Martin Luther King was, or more than just who Harriet Tubman was. You could tell them who Paul Robeson was, or you could tell them who, Benjamin Banneker was. You can tell them all these different people, and there's an opportunity to teach a lesson, and it brings you together as family. Because once upon a time when we couldn't read, all we had was the stories and allegories. And we have to get back to that, and that tightens and strengthens the Black family in particular, and families and specifically. So I really thought that was an interesting perspective on somebody that's twice my age, who lived through a time that we now read in books that they're banning. Yeah. She was like, they can't ban too much. I was there, and so, but I think also, though, I find it ironic that there was always this separation between African American or Black history and American history. Like the two and two aren't the same. You know what I mean? And like for all that slavery and all that Jim Crow and all that civil rights era, that was American history. That's what got us here. And I find it ironic that people are trying to diminish that, or now don't call them slaves anymore. They call them the slave immigrants. Like that changes.
Yeah.
And I just find it fascinating that this is the route that they took, and trying to give disinformation to the people, to the masses. So let me give you my last question. What do you envision as the future of education, and how can we continue to evolve towards more inclusive and culturally responsive practices?
What do I envision for the future of education? I envision a more just education system. Will we ever get there? I don't know, right? Because it's been years. Right, we've thrown literature, we've thrown trainings, we've thrown money, we've thrown positions, we've thrown power around, and yet our children are still divided, right? Because of people. I envision that our education system is going to get a lot more rough before it gets better. I envision that many of our children, unfortunately, children of color, will leave public education and enter into some of the charter and public schools. I envision that more people of color who work as teachers, counselors, administrators, school psychs, will find other places to be. And why? Because education is in crisis, right? And people say that education has gotten worse since the pandemic, and education has gotten worse since the tragic murder of George Floyd. But education has been in trouble for a long time.
Those things just exposed it.
Yeah, it's for a very, very long time. And, until people are able to stand up and collectively stand up together and have that collective impact of equity with one another and say, we're going to lock arms and we're going to do this, right? Despite what the status quo is, despite who's going to get mad, we will continue to run on the hamster wheel. Now, do I foresee more young people of color entering into education? I don't know, because what example have we given them? If they've been mistreated as students, right, why would they want to come in education? I never thought I would be in education. I hated school, right? But again, this work found me after being in large treatment facilities and lockdown facilities and group homes and non-public schools. And eventually I found my way to public education, right? But how can we provide an experience for students that say, I really want to do that? I want to be a teacher, right? By being the example of justice, of goodness, of grace, of mercy, and most of all, of love. So, I'm hoping, right, and I'll continue to stay in the fight, that there will be more people who will become partners for diversity, will become partners for accessibility, will become partners in belonging. That's really my angle. That's really the ground that I stand on when it comes to cultivating relationships and teaching people how to love one another in this education system. So, only God knows where education is going to go, but will I see it completely transform my lifetime? I don't think so.
I feel like the reason why I wanted to go get my doctorate degree was to be in those rooms to have those courageous conversations in regards to change for the better of students. And I think representation is important. Being in the fight is important. And I think people like you and myself, we like to galvanize people. We're good at galvanizing people. We're good at changing the temperature of rooms when we get there and making people think about a different way to do things. But it all starts from a place of love, right? Yeah. Kids don't love us. They don't want to learn from us. Yes. And it's as simple as that. I know it sounds very simple and cliche, but it's as simple as that. When I look back at the course of 20 some odd years in dealing with children, the only thing they consistently say is that, man, we knew you cared about us. At the end of the day, we would run through a wall for you because we knew you had us, right? Yeah. You had your back because you had ours. And it's simple things like that. And it does help the fact that you get this type of representation when you look at our doctoral cohort and how diverse that is. And those different people going out to different spectrums and different different professional areas and how they can be galvanizers of change and affect so much change with just 1, 2, 3 kids here based on our interactions over the course of these 2.5, almost 3 years. Yeah. Right. I think you and I have effectively changed the mindsets of some of them as they have for us. Yes. Those things are important. And as I met somebody important in education yesterday, that was one of the things he said. He was like, the recognition is good, but it's the fact that I'm a representation for somebody. So you can see a little Black kid that wants to be the superintendent of the state of education because they look like him and they know he came from meager means just like they do. And so all that is important. And I think that I hope that I have that same effect when I get to whatever mountaintop I get to.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's real. When I first got this position, it was during the pandemic. We had a serious situation at one of the schools, and I called for what I call healing spaces, and they were on Zoom. And I never forget this Black girl. She sent me a private message on Zoom, and she said, after I heard you speak, she was like, I realized that I could be you. I can do what you do. She was like, thank you for being a Black woman, something that I don't have any control over, right? I was born into this life. Right. She thanked me for being a Black woman in this role, in this space. So I tell you that people are watching you, right? And just even if you don't say anything, right? And you're just walking through, you are an example. You know, right. You don't think anybody's watching, even when they're not saying anything. Even the most hard to love people that are kids and adults, everybody's watching. And I've learned that. So that's why when things get hard for me, I remember that I'm not doing my work for people, but I'm doing it for God. And if I'm doing it for God, well, He's for the people. So one day at a time, right?
It was something you said when we first met. We were doing introductions or whatever. You was like, this isn't my work, this is my ministry. And I felt that. Right. And I felt like this was bigger than just me trying to do something spectacular. Like, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I wake up in the morning and think about. This is what I go to bed thinking about. Like, what can I do tomorrow to affect this change in this kid? Every prayer I do in the morning is, let me be that voice. Let me be that motivator for those who need motivation. Let me be that inspiration for those who need to be inspired. I say that every morning, knowing that I have that kind of effect when I step on these campuses. And so to see that kind of manifest itself at one of our events yesterday was kind of really telling, but it reminded me of why I got into it in the first place. I didn't really get into it for the money or the accolades. I got into it for the level of change, and to see these kids go from 8th grade when I got this position, who are now seniors now, and they're all excited about getting ready to go to college. Those weren't those kids 5 years ago. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the work. That's the work in and of itself. Yes, I appreciate you, my sister. I love you to death. Glad you came on. We got way more work to do in the future, man. I can't wait to get some of this stuff done. But first of all, I got to get past this damn dissertation.
We're going to make it. We're going to make it. One day at a time, we're going to make it. We almost there.
For sure.
You are listening to the BU Podcast with Michael Arrington.
Yes, right. We back. BU Podcast, man. Special thanks and shouts to my sister from another Mr. Juanita for coming through, having a dope dialogue. In closing, man, I just really want to say that the work that I do for students is more than just, it can more than just be quantified by the title that I have. I really wholeheartedly take the term that we use in education, at least in California, called local parentis, which means the parent. And these kids are like my children for the 6 hours that I have them. You know, I want to make sure that they come to a school they feel safe. They have somebody they can come to and confide in. They have somebody that's going to advocate and fight for them. They have somebody that's going to give them a voice, and somebody that knows that every time they step on my campus, they mean something. And I don't know if I always get it right, but I definitely try. And so for those who have had me as their counselor, teacher, confidant, mentor, whatever on the campus, man, I hope that I've given you enough to sustain yourself when I'm not around, and I've given you guidance to be able to give you the right direction to get to where you want to go. I hope that I've been a resource and an asset for you. I am a fighter for change. I am the voice of the voiceless. I try to inspire those who need inspiration and motivate those who need motivation. Like I said, I don't always get it right, but I definitely try. And so that's today's episode, the BU Podcast, man. Again, I got a new book out called Brave Little Me. Go to michaelarrington.education. Check me out, man. Spread the love. 2 fingers, 1 love. I'm out.